So do you think a Chinese invasion of Taiwan is inevitable, or can it still be stopped or prevented?
Oh, I think it can be stopped. I don't even think it's all that hard to stop it. You just have to make the cost much too high. And one thing that you do have to do is make the cost personal for guys like Xi Jinping and that ruling elite in China. And I think we've talked about this before. You've got to make it clear that they're going to lose everything if they make a move. That means all their wealth, all their overseas real estate, overseas bank accounts, all their great relatives with green cards. That is all going to disappear. China's going to lose all of its overseas interests. It doesn't have the ability to protect them yet. So most of its trade will stop, except for with North Korea and maybe Russia and Iran. But with the rest of the world, most of that will stop. They're going to have trouble getting food, getting oil, and they will just be a pariah forever. But making it for a very long time, but making it personal, I said, for the top dogs, that is would go a long way. But also, we tend to think of a military response as the only response, or we often do. And we do need a military that can, if necessary, sink the PLA in an afternoon. We could have that if we had the hardware, the necessary hardware, and were properly sized and rebuilt our Navy, rebuilt our militaries. So you do have to have the military part of it right. And we need to sort of improve ourselves fairly quickly if we can. But at the same time, if you revoke the People's Bank of China's ability to operate in US dollars or to operate in the United States, that would put a big damper on Chinese capabilities. Make it hard for Wall Street to funnel money into China. Stop funding the PRC. Stop funding them with that convertible currency, which with the dollars they must have. Really crack down on technology exports, other business dealings with China, and you can make life, say, pretty miserable for them if you do those things. But if you don't do them, of course, it makes it a lot easier for them. So what you do is you make it very hard for China, not just if they were to go after Taiwan, and at least for a couple more years, we could give them all the trouble that they want. But you want to make it costly on other fronts, and as I said, especially you want the top dogs to suffer, because too often in these kind of regimes that they don't mind, they'll sacrifice 1 million of their own people for something or other. But if you make it so they're sacrificing themselves, it tends to make them act a bit differently. But very often, just showing that you're serious and that you will stand up to this kind of regime, and that you have the capability to do it. It just can't be talk. You can stop it that way. You might ask, well, why didn't, for example, why didn't America go after Cuba? Why didn't we take out Castro? We could have done it any time and pretty quickly, but you think of all the other problems that would have led to. That was one reason we didn't do it. And similarly, while China may have a military advantage when it comes to a certain type of conflict against Taiwan, you make it so there's so much other trouble that they will experience that they just won't do it. That's really sort of one way to look at it, because I've noticed one commentator, not just one, but a lot of them say, well, the Chinese are too powerful. There's nothing we can do for Taiwan. Well, I've just laid out a few things that we can do. So that's, I'm not quite as negative or pessimistic as I might sound.
Yeah, one of the things that we've been doing is more recently doing training by sending Marines into Taiwan, U.S. Marines into Taiwan.
Just for clarity, we have not been doing that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chris.
In case people were confused about our force,
I was spearheading as a non-serviceman myself. I was but you are a Marine colonel and a former intelligence officer. Tell us about what the U.S. is doing in terms of the Marine interaction with Taiwan's military.
Okay, well, unfortunately, I have to admit that a lot of it is actually the U.S. Army doing it too. They sometimes do good work. In fact, they're doing very good work. There's now a fair number of advisors, trainers in Taiwan has been reported. It's not like thousands. I don't know what the exact number is, but it's not huge. But it's more than it used to be. And it used to be you probably could have fit all of them into your studio, and they could have like spread out with room to spare. But there's more of them, and they are actually getting out and about, training and advising Taiwan's military. And I gather that there's going to be Taiwan troops, and in fact, there already are troops training in Michigan with the National Guard, U.S. Army National Guard, and apparently up to battalion size in the future. And that's a pretty big number of people. And the importance of this is not just it helps them learn some new tactics and techniques and ways of doing things, but also it breaks that isolation, that 40 plus years of isolation where the Americans really wouldn't have anything to do with the Taiwanese other than tell them that we love them. But we didn't want to be seen in public with them because China would be angry. So what sort of a message did that send Taiwan, both the government, the people of Taiwan, but also the Taiwan military? They were pretty much were like a baseball team that had never played a game. All they ever did was do these intra-squad games against each other, but they didn't have the experience that comes of actually getting out and doing your job. And now we're getting Americans in there dealing with them, and that makes a big difference. Plus, you do run, if you are an enemy, say mainland China, and you've got Americans around, and then China starts throwing its weight around. Well, once you start killing or hurting Americans, then it's a very different equation. It's harder for an administration in Washington to overlook that. But the significance of this really is not just operational in terms of improving capabilities, but psychologically. We're breaking that isolation that was essential. And now we just have to do more of it. Say, get the Taiwanese Navy and Marines out to Guam, Saipan, for example, and have them do some amphibious training with the U.S. Navy and Marines, and maybe the Japanese will join in. Under some circumstances, they will exert themselves. The Australians might even send up their ship. And you never know. But it's a big change, and it's a good thing. By itself, it isn't enough, but it is one piece of the puzzle, and it's about time. It is interesting that the U.S. Congress had been calling for this in the National Defense Authorization Acts they pass every year, and they've been calling for it since at least 2016 that I remember, was for the Americans to do joint training with the Taiwanese, and the Pentagon just ignored it. Apparently thinking when Congress says they want you to do something, you don't really have to. State Department said the same thing about it. Well, it's just the sense of Congress, so we'll do what we want. And in the meantime, you had the Americans really just giving the Taiwanese the cold shoulder, and they wonder why the Taiwanese military isn't all it should be. They wonder why the Taiwanese government doesn't put all sorts of resources into defense. Well, maybe it has something to do with us not helping them out. I've mentioned this before, and it's our treatment of Taiwan was kind of like if you had a girlfriend and you told her, yeah, look, baby, I love you, and but you don't mind if you see me in public, pretend you don't know me because there's this other gal, and she'd get angry if she saw me with you. Well, I would suggest that your girlfriend isn't going to be all that convinced that you actually do love her, and that's sort of how we were with Taiwan. But we're finally waking up, and that is a good thing. That the one thing last thing I'll note is that I would recommend that we actually give Taiwan a free trade agreement, because so much of Taiwan's problems have to do with their economy, and let them have a free trade agreement with the United States, bolster their economy, and you're going to find the effects are very nice. So that should be something that should be done in addition to the additional military support that we are providing Taiwan.
Well, I think the CCP would love that. I mean, the United States opening up a free trade agreement with one of their provinces, how could they find any fault with that?
Well, nothing to complain about that I can think of. But of course, there is a little bit. But they Now, how do you argue with that? You can complain about us giving weaponry, etc., but how do you complain about economic support? And that is it's part of the dynamic in Taiwan, is that while people may not want to be part of mainland China, and most people do not, they also want, if you particularly young people, want to have decent jobs that pay well. They want to be able to maybe buy a house or an apartment someday. And if your economy it's kind of lagging in that regard, well, you're going to vote for people who say they're going to do that, and that just happens to be is often the opposition parties. So people do often vote on their economic circumstances, and they say we have not taken up this opportunity. And even the Trump administration, which was the best on Taiwan to date, they didn't move on a free trade agreement with Taiwan. And I saw a quote from the USTR, the U.S. Trade Representative, and they said, "Well, we were just too busy, trying to deal with China economically." And it sort of makes one think that maybe government employees don't know what the word work overtime means or work on weekends. But if they had wanted to, they could have done it. But they didn't, and that was a lost opportunity. And it really it bolsters our friends, the DPP administrations, if they can say, "Look, we've made the economy a lot better." So that's we have opportunity to excel on that front as well.